Welcome to another edition of 805 Sports Talk. This week we're going to be talking about the three 11-man football teams who are playing in quarterfinal games across the Central Coast. And in Southern California, we have two teams making long road trips, and we have Santa Maria playing at home. We also have Orchid Academy in an 8-man semifinal game that's scheduled for Saturday night. And we got a packed Saturday as Hancock is hosting a bowl game. Well, actually, they're playing in a bowl game that will be played at Santa Maria High School. So obviously, we still have a lot of football action to go through this week. And we will start with Santa Maria High School. They ended that 23-year winless drought in the playoffs last week, pretty much dominating Carpinteria 56-28. But this week, they have a big challenge. They host Schurr, the top seed in Division 12. They're 10-1. They got a really prolific offense led by quarterback Miguel Aguero, who has over 3,000 passing yards, 39 touchdowns on the season. We know the Santa Maria defense has struggled a little bit containing some of those high-flying offenses. So I think, one of those big matchups Friday night is going to be how that Santa Maria defense prepares, and if they get pressure on the Schurr quarterback. Looking at the max preps rankings alone, Schurr's 219, Santa Maria's 454. So that shows, quite how big of a challenge it is going to be for Santa Maria to keep up with this Schurr team, who is coming to the Central Coast for a quarterfinal game in Division 12. Lorenzo, moving to you, what do you think the Saints' chances are playing top-ranked Schurr Friday night?
Well, one other player I want to mention, too, is Lance Babb. He's the most highly recruited player on the Schurr roster, has Mountain West offers, also has some Service Academy offers. I have to wonder if the Saints actually have a quality shutdown corner to keep him at bay, because I've noticed that right away, Schurr likes going to him early, and it just really ignites that team. So slowing him down, finding a way to slow him down will be crucial. But I agree with you about the Saints' defense, because you've seen it plenty of times. That pass rush can actually come alive, especially with Gerardo Zul, but they're going against a team with a little bit more of a size advantage. So maybe it might be like the Righetti game where, muscle on muscle, Righetti had the edge right there. But, if Santa Maria can find a way to get its pass rush going, they may have a chance, but I don't see it. I think the Schurr team has been on a mission.
Yeah, I think they'll probably have Zul just, pin his airbacks, get after Aguero. I think Jonathan Garcia has been also a good, pass rusher. They do have some good pass rushers there. They're probably going to be double coverage on Babb. Maybe they'll put Ramos on him. Maybe on top have a cornerback play underneath him, something like that. But it is going to be a challenge to slow down a Schurr team. We don't see a lot of these talented athletes that you see in the playoffs during the regular season. So, I think it's going to be tough. I wouldn't be surprised if the Saints are able to keep it close. I think the quarterback matchup is interesting. Aguero is kind of an undersized guy at 5'9". We know Blake Truitt at Santa Maria is undersized, but they're both very productive. So that quarterback matchup, I think, is going to be fun to see. I think it's going to be high scoring. I wouldn't be surprised to see the Saints put up some points. I don't know if that defense is going to do enough to limit Schurr. Kenny, what do you think the Saints are going to do Friday night?
Well, to be honest, I think we have a good chance I think there is a good chance we will still be covering football after this Friday night. I think there is a good chance that we won't be. Frankly, I don't think Santa Maria is one of our teams that has the best shot of getting through. I think Santa Maria's offense will score some points on that Schurr defense. I just don't think their defense will come up with enough stops. They do have a good pass rush, but I just don't think it will manifest itself often enough for the defense to make enough stops with that against that kind of passing game. And Montebello also has a decent running game.
Yeah, I think the Saints have won 5 straight. They were 2-4 at one point. Now they're 7-4. Elliot, do you think the Saints are going to get their 6th straight win against Schurr?
It's going to be tough. They're number 1 seed. I talked to Dan Ellington yesterday. And both teams won at home last week, so they had a coin flip, and Santa Maria won the coin flip, and Ellington thinks that's a good omen. I don't know if he's, got his hopes up too high. They throw 80% of the time, and they just run enough to keep the defense on us. So Zul and Garcia are really going to have to get at it. I talked to Blake Truitt, and he's thinking his defensive work is going to be more important than the offensive work. He's got to keep those guys in front of him and use his skills as a passer and as an offensive player to read their offense so that he can maybe jump a couple guys and pick off a couple passes. But they have a tough road. They're not the number 1 seed for nothing. They didn't just flip a coin and decide they'd be number 1. It's going to be tough. I just don't see Santa Maria has the horses to pull this one off. It's going to be a fun game, an interesting game, and it is here. It's on a turf field. So that's a little bit different. And Schurr's got to make the long ride from Montebello. But, we've seen teams make long rides and survive them, but sometimes they get off to a rocky start while they get into the game mode. So Santa Maria's going to have to surprise them early and then try to hold them off. It's just going to be a huge test, and I just don't see that they have all the players to do it. So I'm thinking Schurr, but Santa Maria will score on them.
Yeah, I'm not crossing Santa Maria off just yet. I wouldn't be surprised if they do keep it close, at least for the first half. And if they were to pull off that upset, it'd probably be one of the biggest upsets in school history and probably one of the biggest stories of this year for sure, and maybe of the last decade or so on the football field.
If it does happen, chalk this up as the biggest upset since that Culver City game back in 1994.
Right.
I think even bigger than that.
Yeah. So Saints are at home. Lompoc is playing at El Toro in Lake Forrest. If they would have played Villa Park, they would have been at home, but El Toro, somewhat of an upset, beating Villa Park in a 50-45 game last week. So the Braves are on the road, traveling to El Toro. Lorenzo, you've looked at the matchup a little bit. What do you think it's going to come down to Friday night for the Braves?
It's going to come down to pass defense because, in talking to Andrew Jones late last night, this team is battle-tested and they love throwing the football around. And when you have three receivers who are at least 6'2", it's a field day for Cooper Jones, the quarterback. And even at the 1 yard line, El Toro prefers to go with a shotgun instead of lining up behind the center. So they believe in lining up 5 yards and just throwing it around. Now, you have Dallas Canley healthy for this game. You also have Jimmy Gardner, who's one of the smarter defenders. But the kicker is you have a banged-up Toa Tawa. I've been told that Andrew Jones actually held him out of practices this week, but more than likely he's still going to play. But you have to wonder what his health is like and how limited he's going to be, especially on the defensive side of the football.
And real quickly, what did you see out of the Braves last week against Camarillo? It was close for maybe the first half. They were able to pull away there. How sharp did they look? How prepared did they look? Let's kind of sum up what you saw Friday.
It went the way I expected. I expected Camarillo to show some kind of fortitude, especially from that first half. They actually scored on their first two possessions, and then from there, Lompoc adjusted and then just proved that they had the experience and the horses to pull away. So, to me, the game kind of went as expected, but I just feel like this El Toro team is going to be an even bigger challenge because just like the Braves, they're senior heavy. And not only that, El Toro has played against Capistrano Valley, the league champion from their league. They played against Corona del Mar. We know Corona del Mar real well from last year. And then they also played against Mission Viejo, a traditional Division I powerhouse. So, they went for a murderous row, but, they'll be battle-tested for this game. So, edge to me goes to the Braves based off of just their ability to adjust and the experience factor. But, I never thought I would say this. The X factor is Toa Tawa. How healthy is he going to be in this game?
Good analysis there, Lorenzo. Kenny, I know before the season started, we were a little surprised to see Lompoc moved up to Division III. Are you surprised now they're just one game away to advancing to another semifinal?
I still don't think they should have been moved up to Division III. I'm not surprised that they're just one game away from advancing to another semifinal. Well, Villa Park was 9-1 going in, and they couldn't get the job done, so Lompoc's going to have to make a long road trip. I'm not sure what Villa Park's strengths were, but as you guys have said, Toro likes to throw the ball around a lot. Lompoc's defense has proven it can cover guys. To me, a big factor will be just how healthy Toa Tawa is. If Toa is healthy, I think the Braves should actually win. Maybe not by a lot, but by a clear margin. But if he's not ready, might even be a toss-up. But I'm still going with Lompoc regardless. I think they'll have enough.
Yeah, I think we see that anyone can run the ball without Lompoc offense, but having a guy like Toa Tawa is huge to kind of grind defenses down. So, yeah, I think it's a great point to see how healthy he is and how effective he is. And on that defensive side, I think Jelani Henderson is going to be huge. He's been playing great, throughout his career, but the last couple of weeks it seems like he's really turned it on. And you've talked about Jimmy Gardner all season kind of leading that defense as well. So those are some kind of key players I think are going to be huge, trying to slow down that El Toro offense, which has been effective, putting up 50 points last week against Villa Park. Elliot, what do you think the Braves are going to do? One win away from advancing to the semifinals. They did it last year in Division IV, now they can try to do it in Division III.
I think they've still got what it takes to win this game. Even without Tawa, there's still a lot of talent on that team. The games don't get any easier. Obviously, this is a playoff. These are the top teams for the most part. A couple teams, as we know, get overlooked every year, but after the first round, there are no gimmies. You get a home game in the first round, that usually means you're a big favorite, and they showed it last week. It took them a little while to get their defense on track, but I think now they've got that under their belts. They're going to come out smoking, and their defense is going to shut them down right from the beginning. So I'm looking for another win. It's not going to be an easy win. It's not going to be a blowout, but I think Lompoc will at least advance one more round.
Here's the thing. I mean, I've actually seen some bad games from Tawa. The San Ynez game was considerably one of his worst games. Lompoc still won. Against Camarillo, he was actually held out of the end zone. Lompoc still wins by a considerable margin. So Lompoc is still in very good shape in this game. Obviously, with Toa in there, you have that inside running element that can wear down defenses. So, I mean, you might see a heavy dose of Ruben Cortez or even a heavier dose of Dallas Cantley. So, I mean, we shall see. But I would imagine that Toa will still play, especially since this is his last go-round.
Yeah, a lot of teams talk about being more than just one player, and I think Lompoc definitely epitomizes that. Andrew Jones over there kind of builds his teams up with a number of playmakers, so they don't just rely on one guy like Toa Tawa. So there are a lot of guys who can step up, and I think we're going to see that Friday night if Toa is not 100%. Moving over to St. Joseph, they're traveling to Lancaster Friday night in the Division V quarterfinals. Kenny, you were on hand to see them pull away or hold off Harvard Westlake. Were you surprised at all that they were able to win that shootout and beat a pretty good Harvard Westlake team? Kind of sum up what you saw Friday night.
I thought it was a pick'em game. I did go with Harvard Westlake in the picks. They were ranked slightly higher, but I'm not surprised that St. Joseph won. Their offense did a lot. Their defense did just enough. But while St. Joseph is fast, Paraclete, I think Paraclete's faster. I really don't see, frankly, I don't see how St. Joseph can come out of the high desert with a win next Friday night. I think there's a good chance they'll acquit themselves well. As Elliot correctly predicted, Nipomo would, but not this week. But I just don't think. I think Paraclete has too many horses. They are the defending state champs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's kind of followed a formula with St. Joseph, winning their first round game and then playing one of the better teams in the state in the quarterfinals. I think they played Newberry Park 3 years ago, Camarillo 1 year, and obviously Calabasas last year, and now they get Paraclete this year. Elliot, what do you think the Knights are going to be able to do in Lancaster?
Nobody does them any favors, and I'll find out. I'm going to go to that game. But much like Santa Maria, they are also playing number 1 seed. 3 of our teams actually are playing the top seed in the second round, or actually Orchid Academy's in the third round. And I just don't see how St. Joe's going to keep up. I think it's going to be an entertaining game. I've had the good fortune of going to some of the closest games this year. But I saw St. Joe lose 17-16, so I don't think it's going to be that low scoring a game, and I think it's going to be a lot of fun. I just don't see how they can beat these guys. They're the defending champs. They're the number 1 seed. They got the long 180-mile bus ride, but Paraclete's just got a lot of kids that can play football. So I hate to root against or go against St. Joseph because they can put up a lot of points, but I just don't see how they can knock off the number 1 seed at their house.
Yeah, Lorenzo, no one thinks the Spirits are going to be challenged in the playoffs this year. You think maybe St. Joseph could be that team?
I wish, but I mean, Paraclete's in the wrong division. We've been saying that. They should be Division II. I'm sorry. Yeah. They should be Division II.
Yeah.
And St. Joseph has to contend with Brevin White, an ESPN 300 quarterback, and Melquan Stuball, a USC target. So, and we've seen this before where St. Joseph goes against some highly talented recruits. It doesn't end well.
Yeah.
I mean, and not only that, here's another thing to keep in mind. In the last 2 years, the team that eliminated St. Joseph went on to win a CIF section title. Calabasas did it last year, Camarillo the previous year. Then you can also add Newberry Park went on to play against Paso Robles in that CIF 2014 final. Unfortunately lost to Paso Robles. So, I mean, whoever beats the Knights, they're in good shape.
Yeah. And we had a couple teams knocked out of the playoffs but they did acquit themselves very nicely. Righetti played at Antelope Valley, and they were in that game for most of it, had a lead, I think, in the second half, ended up falling 38-19. Nipomo looked good, taking on a Golden Valley team, losing 15-2, kind of a rare score. Lorenzo, starting with you, how do you think the players and coaches feel, making the playoffs but having a first-round exit? We know Righetti much improved this year, going 5-6 after 1-9. Nipomo, a little bit short in the Northern League, has a home playoff game. How do you think those teams feel about their season?
I want to start with Righetti. They should feel very optimistic. I mean, going from 1-9 last year, and obviously we had this question of what's the future in store for Ed Herman and his staff. Are they going to be around? They kept that staff together, and they responded with a playoff run. And for a half, they actually hung with Antelope Valley before AV adjusted. And when you look at it next year, Brandon Giddings comes back, Caleb Thomas comes back, of course barring a transfer, but you already have two cornerstones to work with for next year. As far as Nipomo, the vibe I get is that they were angry after the Santa Maria game for blowing that big lead. Mm-hmm. Now I would imagine that they're even more irate because of these two reasons. They lost at home in the playoffs, and they're going into Division II next year in the Central section. So, I don't think that there's a lot of smiling faces right now up north.
Yeah, Kenny, what do you think about Righetti's season as a whole? Nipomo, both teams make the playoffs. They're did okay in league, didn't win league championships, but definitely trending in the right direction. These teams are going to be in a different section next year. How do you think the state of those two programs are?
Well, since it's been a week since they both went out, of course the guys have had a chance to reflect on their respective seasons. I would imagine Righetti would feel at least fairly happy with the season it had. Nipomo, I'm not sure, because I'm sure they felt they should have won the league championship, and all know what happened after they had that 19-0 lead at home. They both acquitted themselves well. As Elliot said, they acquitted themselves well in the playoff games, just came up short. I actually heard a 15-13 score in favor of Righetti towards the start. I mean, it was early in the St. Joseph game last week. Then I guess, as you said, Antelope Valley adjusted. Nipomo, as Elliot said, acquitted itself well against Golden Valley, but when your defense outscores your offense 2-0, you're generally not going to win, and that's what happened. But I think Nipomo can take some satisfaction in getting to the playoffs. As far as who feels better, I would think it'd be Righetti.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Righetti, they had a bounce-back season. They were unhappy when they lost the game, but it's a long ride home. And by the time they got home, they were feeling a whole lot better because they could look at the totality of the season, and they had a great season. After a one-win year, they were in the playoffs. And sometimes making the playoffs is good enough. And now they look to the future. They're optimistic that they got the program turned around, and they're sorry their season is over, but now they can't wait to get started for next year. So that's good for the kids and good for the program. But Nipomo went the other way. They'd been winning that league championship. They always beat Santa Maria. They didn't beat Santa Maria. They went out on a 2-game losing streak, and their offense couldn't score in the playoffs. So I don't see them as being happy at all. I know Tony Dodge, he wants to win. He's a good coach. He always puts that team in the right position to win, but they just didn't get it done. And it was a low-scoring game, so they could have won that game, and they didn't. So there's a lot of unhappy people up in Nipomo right now.
Yeah, I read Brian's story. It sounds like they had a few opportunities, and they just couldn't capitalize.
Yeah, I think it's a good season for Nipomo. They would have wanted more, but I know before the season we were talking about they're struggling to get their numbers up. Tony Dodge wasn't too confident that they would have a lot of depth, but they were right there in the Northern League, made the playoffs, and held a good Golden Valley team to just 15 points. So some good, some bad for Nipomo, and I think more good than bad over there at Righetti. And congratulations to Ed Herman on making the playoffs this year. Moving over to 8-man, where we have one team in Orchid Academy in the semifinals, and they'll play at Pioneer Valley against the top seed Saturday night. Elliot, you were on hand to see them go over to Chadwick and win that game, advance to the school's first ever semifinal, and they're playing Faith Baptist from Canoga Park, the team they lost to 42-28 earlier in their season. That was their first loss of the year. What are the Spartans' chances for Saturday?
They think they're really good. The the last time they played at Faith Baptist. And they said that the bus ride did get to them, and it took them a half of the game to get their act together. This time they're home, they don't have to make the bus ride, and they want to come out smoking right from the beginning. They played 7 of the other 15 teams in the playoffs they played in the regular season. They only lost 2 games. Unfortunately, they were to Faith Baptist and Villanova Prep, and to win the championship. Both of those teams are still undefeated, as was Chadwick last week. They have to beat Faith Baptist and Villanova Prep to win the title, so their road is tough. Faith Baptist is the #1 seed, but the Orchid Academy kids think they can do it. They keep in mind that they beat Mojave, the defending Division I champions. They beat Kate for the first time in school history. Last year they played Chadwick twice and beat them handily in the first game, and then Chadwick had a new coaching staff last year. They got their program together by the end of the year, and Canoga Park beat them in the playoffs. This year they go back to Canoga Park and they just handled them. They manhandled them, and the score could have been much bigger, but they called off the dogs. They just tried to kill the clock, and 2 of the Chadwick touchdowns were scored right at the end of the game when all the backups were in, so the score was nowhere near as close as it appears. So they think they can carry that momentum over. I was there yesterday. I talked to the coach, I talked to the players, and they just can't wait for this game to get underway. They want to get some payback, and they're not looking ahead to Villanova Prep, but they want to get payback the next 2 weeks and bring that championship home. So they got the right attitude. They got the kids that can do it. They didn't get blown out the first time around, and if they can get off to a strong start, they can pull the upset, because they are the #4 seed going against the #1, so it would be considered an upset. But these 2 teams are pretty evenly matched.
All right, when VCA season ended last week in the quarterfinals, losing to Hesperia Christian, a really good team in Division II, but a good season for the Lions. Coast Valley League championship, just coming up a bit short against, I think Hesperia Christian was a top seed in Division II, so they lost on the road, but congratulations, Pete Fortier. A good bounce back season for the Lions, winning the CVL title and making the quarterfinals. And they got some good young players, including Adam Eldana, who is just a sophomore this year, had a monster season running the ball. So I wouldn't be surprised if VCA has another good season next year with some of those young core players that they got. Moving on to JUCO football, Hancock, a resurgent season for the Bulldogs, kind of an unheralded start for them. Not a lot of people expected much out of the Bulldogs. We looked at some of the polls before the season began. Hancock was nowhere to be found, but here they are. They get to play in a bowl game at Santa Maria High School Saturday. Kenny, you were on hand last weekend's game as they won the outright league title, first time since 1997 for Hancock. How would you kind of sum up how they look Saturday and just the attitude and the feeling for that to get that outright league championship over there at Hancock?
Well, I'm sure they have not done any reflection about the season. I'm sure they're amped up for the upcoming bowl game, their first since 2011, which they won. Regardless how this one turns out, they have a right to feel very good about themselves, about how they did this season. I think they've done a very good job. They've beaten some good teams in a variety of ways. Sometimes they have been their worst enemy as far as untimely penalties. They've overcome that. I think even more significantly, good teams often have very good luck when it comes to injuries or the lack thereof. Hancock is a very good team that has not had good luck as far as injuries, the lack thereof. They've had to overcome a lot, as I said, regardless of how this one, which kicks off at 4 o'clock at Santa Maria High Saturday, turns out, they have a right to feel very good about themselves and what they accomplished this year.
If you want to support the Bulldogs, 4 p.m. at Santa Maria High School, they host Southwestern. I think it's American Championship Bowl. The last time they hosted a bowl, I think it was 2011, something like that. And congratulations to Chris Dutra, Hancock's head coach, got his 100th career win over there at Hancock. So congratulations.
And he made those gold mines as well.
Yes, he did.
And the first coach to do that.
As did Osa Omokaro.
Yep.
Because they got first dibs, they play the game at Santa Maria High School, which pushes Orchid Academy the same night at 6:30 over to Pioneer Valley High School, and they want a big crowd too. They'd love to have all of you come out and support them. They think the energy from the crowd can really help them. It's 8-man, so they tend to get smaller crowds, so they're hoping, there's not going to be a lot going on. There'll be Hancock and them. There's enough people in Santa Maria to come out and support both teams. You could even start at Hancock and go over there and have yourself a nice doubleheader. But both of those should be really entertaining football games.
Yeah,
and we have the locals could win them both.
Yeah. A lot of exciting football to look forward to.
Yeah, you also have Hancock basketball. Got to mention them. They won a tournament championship over the weekend, and they host their tournament throughout the weekend. So we got a lot of football coverage still going. I think this is the 13th straight Friday or weekend that we've covered football, starting all the way in August. So it's been a long season, but we're not done yet. So be sure to check out our coverage throughout the weekend. Thank you guys for tuning in to 805 Sports Talk.